Most people assume that financial progress begins when the numbers get big. More income, more savings, more assets. But what actually changes a person's financial trajectory happens much earlier than most people expect. Long before wealth shows up on paper, it shows up in the mind. The first $1,000 of monthly passive income does not transform your lifestyle. It does not make you rich. It does not eliminate the need to work. What it does is far more subtle and far more powerful. It changes how your brain experiences safety. Before this point, most people live in a constant state of financial alertness. Even if they are functioning, even if the bills are technically paid, their mind is always running background calculations. What if something breaks? What if work slows down? What if next month is worse? Every decision is filtered through that quiet fear, whether they realize it or not. Crossing the $1,000 monthly passive income threshold does not remove those risks, but it changes how they feel. For the first time, money stops being an immediate threat. There is a small but reliable buffer that shows up regardless of time, effort, or circumstance. And that reliability matters more than the amount itself. You are not suddenly wealthy, but you are no longer psychologically broke. And that distinction is critical. When survival pressure eases, even slightly, the brain regains space. Decisions stop being reactive and start becoming deliberate. Instead of asking how to avoid disaster, you begin asking how to optimize outcomes. This shift rarely arrives with fireworks. It often happens quietly. One day you notice that you are not constantly checking your balance. You're not panicking over small expenses. You're thinking further ahead. That is the moment when money stops controlling your behavior and starts becoming a tool. The $1,000 milestone is not about income size. It is about reaching the minimum buffer that allows calm thinking. And calm thinking is where all sustainable financial progress begins. Once that mental pressure eases, something important becomes visible. The problem was never intelligence. It was never work ethic. And it was almost never a lack of ambition. The real force shaping most bad financial decisions is something far quieter and far more persistent: financial anxiety. For many people, money stress operates like background noise. It is always on, even during good months, even when things seem stable. That constant hum forces the brain into survival mode. And when survival is the priority, long-term thinking disappears. The mind becomes focused on avoiding the next problem instead of building toward a better future. This is why people stay in jobs they hate, why they turn down opportunities that involve short-term uncertainty, why they panic during market downturns and sell at the worst possible moment. These choices are often labeled as irrational or undisciplined. In reality, they are perfectly rational responses to fear. Below a certain financial buffer, the brain simply does not have the capacity to plan far ahead. It does not matter how smart or capable someone is. When the risk of falling behind feels real, every decision becomes defensive. The goal is not growth. It is survival. This is where the first $1,000 of monthly passive income changes everything. That milestone marks the crossing of an anxiety threshold. Above it, decisions are no longer driven purely by the need to avoid disaster. They begin to shift toward optimization, not reckless risk, but calculated risk. People with a buffer negotiate more confidently. They wait for better opportunities instead of grabbing the first option. They invest with patience rather than panic, not because they are braver, but because they are safer. From the outside, this looks like confidence or luck, but it is neither. It is the absence of constant fear, and over time, that absence compounds just like money does. Better decisions lead to better outcomes, which further reduce anxiety, creating a cycle that quietly separates those who struggle from those who move forward with stability and control. As that cycle of fear begins to loosen, it becomes important to clarify what this new stability actually is and what it is not. Passive income at this stage is not freedom. It is not retirement. And it is definitely not an excuse to stop working. Misunderstanding. This is where many people go wrong. $1,000 per month in passive income does not replace a career. It does not fund a luxury lifestyle. It does not remove financial risk from your life. What it does is far more practical and far more valuable. It acts as a psychological safety net. That safety net exists for one purpose: to cover basic survival needs when things go wrong. Food, utilities, a portion of housing, the essentials that trigger the most fear when income becomes uncertain. Knowing that those needs are covered, even partially, changes how people behave under pressure. When that baseline is protected, decisions stop being rushed. Salary negotiations feel less threatening. Career changes feel possible instead of reckless. Investments are evaluated with patience rather than desperation. People are no longer forced to choose between immediate relief and long-term progress. What makes this buffer especially powerful is its reliability. Unlike wages, passive income is not directly tied to showing up, staying healthy, or keeping a single job. It continues through layoffs, slow months, and temporary disruptions. That consistency creates trust, and trust is what allows the brain to relax. This is why even modest passive income streams often have effects far larger than their dollar value suggests. They stabilize emotions before they build wealth, and emotional stability is what makes rational financial behavior possible. People often assume that better financial outcomes come from better strategies. In reality, better outcomes usually come from better states of mind. Passive income changes the state first. The progress follows naturally. At this stage, passive income is not about escape. It is about space. Space to think. Space to choose. Space to act without panic. And that space becomes the foundation on which every meaningful financial improvement is built. Once people experience that psychological space for the first time, another important shift happens. The goal itself no longer feels distant or abstract. This is where the $1,000 milestone reveals another layer of its power. It feels achievable. Most traditional wealth advice asks people to aim for numbers that are emotionally overwhelming. Save $1 million. Retire with several million more. For most people, those targets immediately trigger mental shutdown. The brain starts doing the math, realizes how far away the goal is, and quietly disengages. When a goal feels impossible, motivation collapses before action ever begins. The $1,000 milestone works differently. It is concrete, it is measurable, and most importantly, it feels within reach. People can imagine what $1,000 per month looks like. They can picture the steps required to get there. That clarity keeps the brain engaged instead of defensive. Another reason this milestone works is flexibility. There is no single correct path. Some people reach it through dividend-paying investments over time. Others through rental properties or shared housing arrangements. Some through digital products, consulting, or small online businesses. Each path requires different skills, timelines, and resources. That variety matters because it allows people to choose a strategy that fits their reality rather than forcing themselves into a mold that does not. When a goal feels attainable, people start experimenting. They try small ideas. They learn from mistakes. They keep going. Momentum builds, not because everything works, but because progress feels real. And momentum is often more powerful than perfection. This is why the $1,000 milestone should not be treated as an endpoint. It is a gateway. Reaching it proves something critical. That passive income is not a theory. It is not reserved for a select few. It is real, repeatable, and scalable. Once that belief locks in, the question stops being whether it is possible. It becomes how to build the next layer. And that change in belief reshapes how people see money, opportunity, and their own capacity to build something sustainable over time. However, this is also the point where the journey becomes most fragile, not because people fail, but because they succeed just enough to get distracted. The most dangerous moment in building passive income is not when nothing is working. It is when something finally starts working. When people earn their first few hundred or first $1,000 in monthly passive income, the instinct is almost automatic. They treat it like a raise, a reward, proof that they are doing something right. And with that comes permission. Permission to spend a little more, upgrade a few conveniences, add small comforts that were previously out of reach. On the surface, this feels reasonable. After all, the money is passive. It feels earned without effort. But this is exactly where the power of passive income begins to collapse. Spending that early passive income does two things at once. First, it removes the psychological safety buffer that created calm thinking in the first place. Second, it quietly returns the person to the same mental state they were in before, still dependent on active income, still exposed to disruption, just operating at a slightly higher baseline. This process is often called lifestyle inflation, but that term understates how fast and automatic it can be. The shift rarely feels like indulgence. It feels like identity alignment. You start to see yourself as someone who makes passive income, and that new identity begins to demand a matching lifestyle. The danger is not the purchase itself. It is what the purchase replaces. Every dollar spent is a dollar that no longer compounds. Every convenience bought is future stability delayed. Early passive income is not meant to be consumed. It is meant to be protected. Its real purpose is not comfort. It is momentum. Only when that income is allowed to accumulate and reinvest does it begin to multiply its effect. Not just financially, but psychologically. The calm that comes from a buffer must be preserved long enough to become permanent. This is why discipline matters most, right after progress appears, not before. And those who understand this difference are the ones who continue building while others quietly stall at the first sign of success. Once early passive income is protected instead of consumed, something powerful begins to happen. The focus quietly shifts from enjoying the income to multiplying it. This is where reinvestment stops being a financial concept and starts becoming a long-term advantage. Reinvesting the first $1,000 of monthly passive income transforms cash flow into a growing engine. Instead of disappearing into daily expenses, that money is redirected back into assets that produce more income. Over time, those assets begin to generate their own returns, which are then reinvested again. This is the point where passive income starts feeding itself. What makes this process so effective is that it does not require working harder or earning more from a job. The effort has already been done. The system is now doing the work. Each dollar that is reinvested becomes a small worker added to the system, quietly producing results in the background. This compounding effect is what separates people who build lasting wealth from those who stall at the same income level for years. Many people reach an early milestone and stop there, satisfied with the progress. Others understand that the milestone is only useful if it becomes fuel. The difference is not intelligence or access to better strategies. It is patience. Delaying consumption often feels like sacrifice, but in this context, it is not deprivation. It is leverage. Every dollar not spent today increases the income capacity of tomorrow. Over time, that leverage accelerates freedom far faster than lifestyle upgrades ever could. This is why reinvestment is not a trick or a shortcut. It is a behavioral discipline. It requires understanding opportunity cost, choosing future stability over present comfort, choosing momentum over celebration. As passive income grows through reinvestment, something else grows alongside it. Confidence. Not emotional confidence, but structural confidence. The confidence that comes from knowing your financial system is expanding even when you are not actively pushing it forward. And once that snowball begins to roll, progress no longer depends on motivation. It depends on consistency. That is when passive income stops being a milestone and starts becoming a strategy. As reinvestment becomes a habit, another layer of awareness begins to develop. This is where many people start to see money differently, not as something to spend or save, but as something that represents choices over time. This is the moment when opportunity cost stops being an abstract idea and becomes personal. Every dollar that comes from early passive income carries a hidden price tag. not in what it costs today, but in what it could have become tomorrow. When you spend from that first $1,000 per month, you're not just buying convenience or comfort. You are trading future income for present relief. This is why small expenses matter more than they appear to. A recurring subscription, a modest upgrade, a habit that feels insignificant in isolation, can quietly delay progress by months or even years when viewed through the lens of compounding. The cost is not the purchase itself. The cost is the income that purchase could have generated over time. This perspective is where most people diverge. Many evaluate spending based on affordability. Can I pay for this without stress right now? People who build lasting wealth evaluate spending based on future value. What does this decision cost my long-term freedom? That shift changes everything. Ordinary purchases stop being emotional rewards and start being strategic decisions. Not because enjoyment is wrong, but because timing matters. Early passive income has leverage that later income does not. It sits at the base of the compounding curve. Understanding opportunity cost does not mean living in constant restriction. It means being intentional. It means recognizing that the first phase of building passive income is not about comfort. It is about momentum. Once this mental model locks in, discipline becomes easier. Spending is no longer about denial. It is about alignment. Each choice either pulls the future closer or pushes it further away. This is the quiet advantage of thinking in opportunity cost terms. It trains the mind to see beyond the moment. And when enough moments align in that direction, financial independence stops being a distant idea and starts becoming a predictable outcome. As opportunity cost becomes part of how decisions are evaluated, the real value of the $1,000 milestone becomes impossible to ignore. It was never about the size of the income. It was about what that income does to the quality of your decisions. When people live without a buffer, every choice feels urgent. They accept deals that are not ideal because they cannot afford to wait. They rush into investments because standing still feels dangerous. Or they avoid risk entirely because one mistake could be devastating. None of these behaviors come from poor judgment. They come from pressure. Once that monthly buffer exists and is protected, the pressure lifts just enough to change behavior. People start waiting instead of reacting. They negotiate instead of settling. They walk away from bad opportunities without panic. They take calculated risks instead of emotional ones. This improvement in decision quality compounds quietly over time. One better choice leads to another. Small advantages stack. Career moves improve. Investments are made with patience. Mistakes become survivable rather than catastrophic. The same person with the same intelligence and skills begins producing dramatically different outcomes. This is why scared money almost always makes poor decisions. Fear narrows focus. It shortens timelines. It prioritizes immediate relief over long-term benefit. Buffered money does the opposite. It expands time horizons. It allows strategy to replace urgency. From the outside, this can look like confidence or even luck. In reality, it is simply the absence of constant fear. When survival is no longer the dominant concern, the brain can finally do what it does best. Evaluate, compare, optimize. This reframes how we think about financial success. It is not primarily about talent or discipline. It is about feedback loops. Fear creates bad decisions, which create more fear. Stability creates better decisions, which reinforce stability. The $1,000 buffer interrupts the negative loop. It gives people the psychological space to begin compounding not just money, but judgment. And over time, improved judgment becomes one of the most powerful assets anyone can build. As decision quality improves and stability becomes familiar, another shift begins to take place, one that goes beyond numbers entirely. This is where passive income starts to change how people see themselves. For most of their lives, people are conditioned to believe that money only comes from time, hours worked, effort traded, presence required. When income is tied entirely to labor, Identity forms around being a worker, someone who earns, someone who reacts, someone who depends on external systems to function. The first consistent stream of passive income quietly breaks that identity. It proves something that was previously theoretical, that value can be created once and delivered repeatedly. That money can arrive without direct effort each time, and once that proof exists, perception shifts. Opportunities that once felt unrealistic begin to feel approachable. A rental property no longer seems impossible. A digital product no longer feels like a gamble. A side project no longer looks like wasted time. The person has not suddenly become braver. They have become safer. This is the psychological tipping point where scarcity thinking starts to dissolve. When someone is operating in survival mode, most opportunities are invisible. The brain is too busy protecting the present to imagine the future. Passive income changes that by creating space. And in that space, possibility becomes visible. At this stage, people stop seeing themselves as consumers of income and start seeing themselves as builders of systems. That identity shift is powerful. Builders experiment. They test ideas. They think in timelines instead of paychecks. They plan months and years ahead instead of weeks. This transformation often happens quietly. There is no announcement, no dramatic moment, just a gradual change in how problems are framed and how options are evaluated. The person begins asking different questions. Not how much does this pay right now, but how does this scale? Not can I afford this, but does this compound? This is why the $1,000 milestone matters beyond money. It reshapes identity, and once identity shifts, behavior follows. Over time, that behavioral change becomes one of the most valuable assets a person can build. By the time someone reaches their first $1,000 of monthly passive income, it can feel like a finish line. Months or years of effort finally produce something tangible. And that is exactly why this moment requires the most restraint. The $1,000 milestone is not a reward. It is an entry fee. Treating it like extra spending money strips it of the very power that made it valuable in the first place. The calm, the clarity, the improved decisions, all of that comes from the buffer being protected, not consumed. Throughout this journey, the pattern has been consistent. Stability improves decision quality. Better decisions create better outcomes. Better outcomes reinforce stability. The $1,000 buffer is the trigger that starts this cycle. But the cycle only continues if that buffer is respected. The hardest part of building wealth is rarely technical. Most people can understand the basics of saving, investing, or earning. What stops progress is the emotional urge to immediately reward yourself for improvement, to turn momentum into comfort instead of leverage. The 1K rule works only when that urge is resisted, when early passive income is treated as foundational capital rather than lifestyle fuel, when it is reinvested, protected, and allowed to compound quietly in the background. This is where the long-term advantage is created, not through dramatic moves, but through consistency. Not through deprivation, but through timing. Comfort delayed becomes freedom accelerated. The first $1,000 does not make you wealthy. It does not remove risk or guarantee success. What it gives you is leverage. Psychological leverage, strategic leverage, the ability to think clearly, wait patiently, and choose deliberately. And that leverage is fragile. Spend it too early, and it disappears. Protect it, and it multiplies. So the lesson is simple. Even if it is not easy, do not celebrate the buffer. Defend it. Build on it. Let it do its work. Because what determines whether someone stays stuck or builds real financial independence is not how much they earn. It is how they treat the first proof that something different is possible.